Thank you very much, Millicent. And welcome. My name is Lindsey Hilsum. I'm the editor of Channel 4 News, and I'm here to help launch a rather amazing book by a rather amazing man, Mr. Paul Conroy. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And in the conversation, we are not going to go through everything that's in the book, and because I don't want to spoil it for you, because afterwards you are all going to buy the book. I hope you've got more copies than that, because you're all going to buy, a copy of the book and one for your closest friend, relative, etc. Because actually it's a really good book. It's a really good book. I came back from Istanbul this morning, and I had read the book and I took a lot of notes and all the rest of it, and I've left my notebook at home. So let's go.
Rock it.
Paul, tell me, I'm going to start at the end, not the beginning. So, because I'm interested in the process of how you wrote this book. So, first of all, I mean, it's not a secret that you were very badly injured in the attack which killed our beloved friend and colleague, Marie Colvin. And there's something I read in the book, which was that your leg, you could put your hand through the injury.
Yeah, that was the first. After the missile hit, I was stood there like a cartoon character with smoke coming off me, and it felt like someone had hit me with a baseball bat, and I was like, ow, thinking a brick or something, and I felt a bit warm, so I was a bit, ooh, and put my hand down, and it just popped out the other side of my leg, at which point I went, oh, shit. And for the first 10 seconds I stood there going, oh no, hospital food, rubbery potatoes, like congealed custard, and then it came back to me, and I was like, oh, stop, think about that later. People can always bring me food in. And then I kind of came back to life, and I had a little rummage around and found the artery to check. That was my primary concern, was to check the artery was still pumping, and then the bone. And yeah, realised it was, which was good. And I had a scarf on, so I whipped that off and tied it, and made myself a tourniquet, really, just to stop the immediate blood flow.
It helps having been a soldier, doesn't it? I mean, you were a pretty crap soldier from what I read in this book.
Absolutely useless.
Right, but you got the first aid bit.
Yeah, I learned that bit. I was awake when they taught me that. No, it was just
because you wouldn't have survived if you hadn't known that, would you?
No, not at all. I mean, I would have just bled out in the rubble, and it was just instinct. That as soon as I realised how much blood was coming out, I just had to get me rather grubby scarf. And then actually I found an Ethernet cable that had been blown out of the building, and I tied that round as well because it was still bleeding, and that is the most useful thing an Ethernet cable is for, is tourniquets. It worked a treat, and that's
the modern world is a great thing.
It is. If it wasn't for the internet, I wouldn't have my leg.
So you have one operation in Bab el Ammar under fire with no anaesthetic, right?
Yeah, it was a bit grim, because for the
doesn't sound great.
No, it wasn't great. I tell you, the NHS after that. 2-hour wait. Don't worry about it. No, they got me out of the building eventually, chucked me in a van, in a car actually, and took me to the hospital. And I was laying there, and the pain had started to actually, for the first 15 minutes it was painless. It was just like, ooh. I kept poking it and being silly, trying to figure out just how bad it was. So they got me to the hospital and cut my trousers off, and I'm sure you all saw the pictures of me on the internet, my lovely boxers that were clean 3 weeks before I went in. And so they sat me there, and he said, look, we're going to have to cut all this kind of mincemeat off. And I said, that's fine. He said, but we've run out of anaesthetic. And I was like, okay, can I smoke? And they just looked at me and said, you can do anything. The buildings were falling in around us. So the health and safety broke that one. So I'm sat there having a fag while these guys just basically got a pair of scissors out and snipped it all off. And then he said, oh, we've got to wash it. And I was like, I assumed you were going to. So they got a bottle of iodine and poured it into the hole. Ooh. Which really smarted something. And then he got what suspiciously looked like a toothbrush and started kind of scrubbing the insides. And I said, can I have another fag, please? And they were like, yeah. In fact, the nurse was lighting cigarettes and giving them to me. The worst cigarettes in the world. In fact, I said to the FSA guys, I said, why don't you get these cigarettes, put them in mortars and fire them back at Assad's lot and use them as chemical weapons, because they were really awful cigarettes. But they were great at the time. They did the job.
So let me come back to writing the book, because then you come back to Britain and you have, I think, 14 operations.
Yeah.
You're in acute pain. How do you write a book when you're going through that, and when also you've lost one of your best friends, you've been through the most extraordinary experience? How did you write?
It was really, I mean, the process was, I woke up one day, and where's Annabelle?
She's there.
The lovely Annabelle was sat next to my bed. I was heavily, not into morphine, I was heavily on morphine at the point. And I had a conversation with Annabelle, and it was lovely, and she said, you know, do you think you could write a book? I had that much morphine in me, I could have written the Bible at that point. I was just like, yeah, no problem, no. And so Annabelle left, and I sat there and I thought, 90,000, that was completely, 90,000 words? Are there 90,000 words? And is it cheating if you use the one twice? They were these kind of thoughts I had. So after a while I realised that you can use and if and but again. But it was really difficult, because every time I sat down in the hospital to write, someone would come in and start kind of taking blood out of me, or they'd take me and operate. So it was just complete insanity to try and write in the hospital, because there was just never a moment's peace. But I do remember sitting there with the laptop and just kind of opening it going, ha, I'm an author now. It was like...
And did you... But what about, because you're on morphine. Morphine makes your mind cloudy.
Yeah, very. But it makes it... well, yeah, I thought by the time I got to the end of the book, I'd written like a Hunter S. Thompson novel. You know, Paul, were there really green lizards in Baba Amra? Well, I can swear there were. But no, it makes your mind cloudy. But what I found was that if I got up at 4 a.m. in the morning, that the morphine had dropped to a low level and the pain was at a balance. So I ended up writing it between kind of 4 a.m. in the morning and 9 a.m. when I had the next kind of hit of morphine. And I felt like I'd done it, and that's the rhythm I got into. It was kind of 4 or 5 hour sessions between morphine and pain. And if you tried it in either of them other sections, it was just impossible.
And was it a therapeutic process for you to write about this? Because you had been through the most, I mean, not just the physical pain, but the loss of Marie, I mean, the most unbelievable grief and terror.
I mean, it was, and I'm really, really so glad I did it, because there was nothing now locked away. You know, I went through that journey from the phone call to
the phone call when they said go to Syria.
Said go to Syria, yeah. So I really did go through, and I took it apart piece by piece. And I mean, I found the writing of the setup of the book and the getting there, but always, in a way, I was bringing Marie back to life by revisiting everything. And at the back of my mind, all of the time I was writing, there's going to come one day when I have to write that chapter. And so it was a really difficult thing to do, to bring somebody back to life and to live and talk to them again and recall the conversations, and then have to write that chapter, which I put off plenty of times for various reasons. I would just like, I've taken too much morphine or whatever.
Did you know you could write? Because you're a photographer and a cameraman, and before that you were a soldier. Did you know that you could write?
No, I mean, most people were unaware that I could talk, because I'm a photographer.
Paul, anybody who knows you, anybody who meets you for more than 30 seconds knows you can talk.
I mean, I'd written a couple of pieces for newspapers and all of that, but I'd never, ever attempted anything on the scale of a book.
Right.
So it was a challenge for me, but a good challenge, because I'm actually really rather not very good at sitting down and doing nothing, and which is all I could do, was sit down with a hole in my leg. And so it kind of really got me through that pain, and through the grief of losing Marie. You know.
I mean, one of the things which I think is interesting about the book is that I can hear you talking when I read it. It's almost like you're not writing. It's almost like you're talking. I can hear your voice, and I can hear your humour.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I know how. I mean, if I was to sit down and overwrite it, I don't think it would come across. I literally just sit there and pretend I'm telling the story as I'm writing. I tried other methods, but it was just, dictaphone and all of that, and it didn't work. I just had to sit there and just tell the story as it was. It was an A to B story.
Let's talk a little bit about your relationship with Marie. Marie was famous for not working well with photographers. She was quite famous for getting up early in the morning, leaving without telling the photographer where she'd gone, because she really couldn't be asked to deal with them. But you and Marie really clicked. Why was that?
I think it went back to our first meeting, which was in in Syria about 10 years ago. We were both out there trying to get into Iraq, and we had to wait in this really disgusting building and every day try and get the Syrian secret police to give us a piece of paper to say you can go in, cross the border. It was just nonsense. We weren't going in. And I was sat there one day in the room with all the other journalists, and we were all like on methadone or something, and we were that bored, and they were all sat there dribbling, and we'd been there months. And then the door to this Muhakbarat office opens, and there's Marie, and she just stands there and she goes, in like one real feline movement, she just goes, "My God, they're drugging the fucking journalists." Closed the door, and that was the last I saw of her. And it was like, wow, there she goes. And so I was getting really bored, so I thought, I'll build a boat to get across from Syria into Iraq. So with the aid of a friendly taxi driver, I purloined 4 huge lorry inner tubes, and in my hotel room in the desert, I made a boat out of 4 inner tubes and planks of wood. And it looked great because I was looking out the window going, desert, boat, desert, boat. So with the aid of a few people, we kind of rolled this boat up, lowered it out the hotel window into the taxi, because everyone was going, going to try, and all the other press were going, don't you be sneaking in and spoiling it for us all. I was like, oh, okay, no, I'm not going anywhere. So we tried, and we pumped the boat up, me and a mate Paul and a girl called Liz, at midnight on the Tigris River. And we bribed everyone basically to turn the other way as we went past with our boat. And just as we're launching it and everything's looking good, we had a few shots and the Syrian army are shooting at us. So we kind of quickly abandoned the boat and went to steal another boat from another village, where we came across the Syrian army checkpoint where they caught us and put bags on our heads. And that's it. I was saved by the fact that the guy who eventually came in and spoke English said, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "Liverpool." He went, "Stephen Gerrard, Michael Owen." I went, "A Manchester United shite." And he went, "Yes, very shite."
It works every time, doesn't it?
It worked a charm. Could have got it wrong, no? Could I got Man United? So eventually we went through the system, and they let us out the other end. And I'm sat on my own, even more of a pariah by now, because no one will talk to me, because they think I've spoilt it for them.
Yeah.
And so I'm sat in the hotel having a drink, and then the door bursts open, and it's Marie again. She goes, "Who and where is the boatman?" And I was like, "That's me." And she came across, stuck out her hand and went, "Nice to meet you. I like your style." Sat down, a couple of scotches, and that was literally how we met, and our friendship was born, and we both love sailing. So she thought the idea of sailing into Iraq was fantastic, even though it was on 4 rubber rings.
And it didn't work.
And it didn't work either.
Yeah,
She got
I
in.
just have to point that out.
It didn't work. I had to go to Jordan and sneak in that way. But that was the basis of our friendship.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I never really saw her, once or twice. And then the Sunday Times, Annabelle, who's here.
Yes, there she is.
There she is. Hooked me up with Marie again. And I went to meet her in a hotel in Cairo.
This was at the time of Libya, when you were going to go into
Libya
Misrata.
was just starting.
Yeah.
And I walked into the hotel, and Marie was just there, and she was like, "Boatman!" And it was great, and all her face was completely smashed in. And I was like, "What's happened to you?" And she goes, "I was sailing." And apparently I don't know if she was the best sailor in the world.
Yeah, I've heard different views on this.
But the boom had hit her, so she had kind of face was a mat, and it was like, "Marie, you're looking great."
But you really clicked, didn't you?
Yeah, there was a magic there. There was something there, because I know when I call the desk and all that, I'm going, we've been in Misrata for about 4 weeks. I'm going, you okay? And I'm going, yeah. I'm going, is Marie okay? And I'm going, yep. And I'm going, everything's okay? And it's like, yep. And, you know, it's still there. I don't know, but I think it was probably the longest she'd ever spent with a photographer without sending them somewhere or evading them.
And how did you... So she thought you were great, I know that. What was it like working with her?
Oh, it was fantastic, because I mean the humour, you know, I mean we both had that humour that was, when things were as bad as they ever got, you know, we could laugh at things. But it was the intensity. She didn't just scratch at the surface and write the first thing down. You know, we went to Sirte when Gaddafi had just been killed, and we had a driver, Farouk, and she's going, right, we're going to go into Sirte now. And he's going, no, we're not. And he's just like, oh, yes, we are. And I'm going, Farouk, just drive. It'll be easier for you. I know the result if you don't. So this guy drives in to Sirte, and he's this big, burly rebel with guns everywhere, is shitting himself. Marie's going, we got to find a house. We got to find a house. And he's going, we can't do that. And she's going, yes, we can. And I'm going, yes, we can, Farouk, we can. So, I mean, and that was it. She just always push.
Yeah.
So, in the end, we found a house.
Yep.
And that was it. And this guy, you know, was like, I've never seen any. Well, that's on the way back. We had to file the picture. It was Saturday afternoon, about midday. And so I got out the car as we were moving and gaffer taped the satellite transmitter to the top of the roof of the car. And he's just like, he said, I've never seen this before. And he goes, you've never worked for the Sunday Times before.
But she, technologically, she didn't actually quite get it, did she?
No, that's what the word Luddite means.
Yeah.
In Latin, it is Colvin.
Yes.
We used to have, you know, great times when, you know, she was setting up for interviews and we were going live. And I walked in one time and she just had the laptop upside down. This is in Baba Amra, just shaking it. Going, Paul, the laptop's broken. And I walked in and I pressed the hibernate button. And it was like, came back, and she's like, wow, what did you do? And then just before the live on CNN, she's gone, Paul, it's broken. I'd lent her my earphones. And I came in and she's just there with the wire dangling in it around there. And I said, hang on 1 second, Marie, and got the earphones and plugged them in. She goes, fuck, you fixed it. Well done. Turn the volume up a bit.
I'm going to take you now into Baba Amr and ask you to read a passage. This is when Paul and Marie first get into Baba Amr. Marie looked up and down the street, then at me. Nice place, huh? She quipped, her sparkle back. Last time I booked a cheap holiday on the internet, I replied. But then we get serious. And this is the bit where you describe going into what was the media centre, and the media centre was basically your life in those days. So can you read this?
I'll try. I've got me
marked it out. He said that I should
now.
read it. I said he should read it.
I can write, but I can't read.
Oh, bollocks.
Must do that. Okay, I'll do my best. The figure who had answered the door now opened a sliding... I'll start again. I told you I can't read. The figure who had answered the front door now opened a sliding glass door opposite the window onto the street. The vocal drone filled our ears, and the scene that greeted us stopped me in my tracks. Through the thick haze of cigarette smoke hanging motionless in the air, I saw a scene reminiscent of a hurricane relief shelter. Between 15 and 20 people, wrapped in thick blankets, lay crouched on old mattresses that covered every inch of available floor space. Each of the blanket people had a laptop. The floor, or what was visible of it, was a tangle of wires, power cables and extension leads. A single tungsten bulb made a poor job of illuminating the rectangular room. The ghostly glow from the computer screens cast eerie shadows on the walls. To our left, in the centre of the seared bodies, stood a low table. It too was covered in wires, empty cigarette packets, saucers that overflowed with freshly smoked cigarette butts and empty coffee cups. On the wall to our left, on the other side of the door, that had been blocked by boxes. Directly opposite was a sliding door leading to the back of the house. The source of the noise was now obvious. Skype. Almost everyone in the room was shouting into a computer or headset microphone. As I looked more closely, I realised it was more like a scene from a science fiction film than a hurricane. relief centre. The room was the headquarters of a hunted and starving band of outlaws who were bound together by their desire to survive whatever plague, tyrannical super race or alien, that had threatened their existence and forced them to live in the shadows of the night. In reality, my science fiction wasn't far from the truth. The Blanken people were indeed the haunted. They were the outlaws, targets of a murderous regime. They were the media, and this was their temporary home.
So that was you?
Yeah.
A band of hunted and starving outlaws?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you believe that you were targeted by the regime?
I would say without any doubt, because they knew that media centre, I'm sure, was operating, and I'm sure they allowed certain amounts of information to come out for their own purposes, because it's now a very war is very information driven. So if some comes out, the government could take it, retitle it, put it out. But it had gotten so bad when me and Marie were there that we really thought that Sunday might not come for the edition of the Sunday Times. And that's why we decided to transmit on Channel 4, CNN, and the World Service.
But this was when you went back in, because you had been in and you had filed an extraordinary, powerful report about the widow's basement where the women and the children were staying. And then you went out because you were told that you were going to be attacked. But Marie was determined to go back in. What was that about?
Well, we'd gone out, we got a lot of information that the land forces were about to come in, and that there was that tunnel that we'd gone in through, and I'm sure Paul remembers it well, was the only way in and out of Baba Amra. So we were given
So this is like a long
it's a
drainage
3 kilometre kind of storm drain that you could never stand up straight in, so no matter what tricks you played with your body, it would always back muscle,
and
legs,
there's a hellish
thighs.
Description of that in here. Yeah.
So we'd gone out. They said, look, it really is going to happen tonight. We've got to get you out. Or in the morning, we've got to get you out. And we ummed and ahed and made so many calculations. Should we stay or go? And in the end, they left us no option. They said, you are going out. So they got us out through the tunnel. The land invasion never happened that night. And so we both, the next day, were like, we fucked up. We shouldn't have. We should have stayed. We should have seen it through. And so for 2 or 3 days we ummed and ahed. We tried to get to Hammer, which was the town 40 kilometres up the road. It was impossible. There was no communication. We couldn't get there. So we were back 10 kilometres from the centre of Homs. And we really just made the decision. Marie really and I, we did mess up. We left. The attack didn't come. Let's go back.
But we've all done that. Because you can't know.
No.
You didn't fuck up. That's what the rebels told you was going to happen. You didn't have a lot of choice.
No, but we still felt it. But when we sat down and we talked about it, it was like, and it was all happening, and there was a choice then to just sit and listen to it.
You'd had a great story.
We'd had a great story, and yeah, there was just that part of us that after Hammer, where we thought we might get a new story, we realised that actually the story at the time was Baba Amra and what was happening. And we knew what was happening inside, and it was getting worse. It was intensifying, and we really just couldn't walk away from that story.
And you both felt that?
Yeah. And then I got to a point where we got just to the tunnel edge, and the day we actually went in, I'd had a bad feeling all day, and I was just couldn't put my finger on it. There was nothing I knew. It wasn't new information. It wasn't. It was nothing other than a gut feeling that I felt a bit something wasn't right. It's like you must have been driving down them empty roads, and there's nobody shooting at you. There's nothing happening, but there's something saying, "Don't drive down that empty road." You don't know what it is, and you turn back. You just instinctually you turn back and you don't go down the empty road.
And you had that feeling?
And I had that going just before we got in the tunnel. And me and Marie, I had a brief conversation where I explained, hey Marie, I'm getting a bad feeling. And we discussed it for a few minutes. It wasn't an argument. It was just like, I laid my cards on the table saying, bit of a bad feeling about this one. Not sure what it is. Can't put my finger on it. It's nothing tactical. It's nothing military. It was just a feeling. She said, well, I'm a journalist. You're a photographer. I'm going on. You can go home if you like. And it was like, oh, great. Yeah, imagine walking in. Where's Marie? Oh, left her back there.
She was doing what she felt she had to do.
Absolutely. You know, there was no, and that was it. It was a brief discussion, and then it was like, okay, let's go. And it was never mentioned again. But you know, she felt that strong, and all I had to go on was a hunch. And there was no way in this world Marie would drop a story on a hunch. And
on somebody else's hunch.
On somebody else's hunch, even if it was her own, I think she would keep going. But on my hunch, it was like, okay, well, let's go on, and that was it. That was the discussion, and after that, it was like all systems go.
Let me tell you, there's a couple of sort of general things you say. One thing that you say, which I've heard other photographers and cameramen say, you say that in these situations, the camera is a shield. Well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, you see the most horrific scenes, and you stand behind it, and really, no matter what's in front of me, I put the camera up, and all of a sudden, I'm thinking about light, I'm thinking about framing the shot, I'm thinking about if the paper can use it. You know, there's so much going on in your head, and you're looking through the lens, and it's quite a technical process getting the right shot. That you actually are, you know, a 200mm lens separate from whatever horrific sight you're seeing. Whereas I think the with Marie, I mean, it's, you know, she's got to look at that, and
well, you're engaging with the people, aren't you, in a different way?
And she's talking, whereas, you know, and I'm hiding behind my lens. So that's the separation. And I mean, it's only a small degree of separation, but it actually makes a difference. When I've been there, no camera, you know, your battery's flat or something, it's a bit, you know, why am I here?
Yeah. And then there's another bit, which just very short, which I'll read, which this is after you've been injured and you're finding your way out and you're in incredible pain. Within minutes the door closed and the van shifted into gear. We pulled off along the deeply rusted dirt road. A dim bulb illuminated the back of the van, giving me the opportunity to film some footage of my fellow wounded and to record a small piece to camera. What? Their injuries range from broken legs and gunshot wounds to multiple shrapnel blasts. Excuse me, your leg had been pretty much blown off, and you were still filming.
Well, I had the flip cam. All my other cameras had been blown up, so I thought, well, I felt a bit useless. I was a bit useless, but I thought, I've got this camera, I might be able to get something out of what's happened. And so it was just a little kind of, so I did a little interview in the back of the van with all the other guys, and did a piece to camera that, you know, actually when I look back at it, I'm kind of glad I did, but I don't know what I was thinking when I did it. It was like, oh yeah, a bulb, you know, it was like photographer going, light, camera, ooh, I think I can play.
So it's like an instinct.
Yeah, it was just, you know, oh, this is a chance to shoot, because the tunnel was so dark, I couldn't shoot. And I did actually shoot crossing the border from Syria into Lebanon on the flip cam as well. And I was kind of trying to do a piece to camera to that as well, but I was just kind of sniggering really that I'm getting out. And it was on a boat. Well, it wasn't a. We were going down a path, and I was hanging on the back of this rebel, and I saw a boulder field, and I thought, that's where they grow boulders. That's where they come from. I was like, thank God we're not on that. And as I thought it, he turned onto the boulder field, and it was like, oh God, better film this. So that's what I was actually filming at the very, very end as I crossed into Lebanon, was the boulder field.
Do you think, I mean, I'm coming back to pain, which is where we started, because I think a lot of us fear pain. And you've been through an extraordinary amount of physical pain. Do you think that you're particularly good at withstanding physical pain, or do you think it's the military training you had?
I just think I really had no choice. There was no option. When we were in that, when they'd done all the cutting off and that, and done that, there was, you know, they put us in a room it was dark, there was a candle, and I knew we were going to be there for some time, and the pain was really starting to, at that point, kick in. And there was nothing you could do other than keep a lid on it. You couldn't, if you let that pain take control of your body, then you would lose, then your mind, you know, you had to keep your mind occupied and not kind of go crazy, because you had to stay sane, because you knew you had to escape. You knew there was very little chance of escape because of the situation, and all the time you're in.
Did you think Did you always think you would escape? Did you think you would survive?
I was determined. There was no way I was going to be shot by the Shabir in that room. And unless a shell came in, you know, which was very, very possible. Because the house we were in started off as a house. And by the time we actually left, and there's, you know, very little of it left, it was like a room with a few bits on it. But I thought, if the shells don't get us, then, you know, I'm crawling out of here.
So do you think that's... is that an animal instinct, or what is it?
I think it is an animal instinct. I was just determined that there was no way I was going to die in a pool of my own blood stuck to a mattress in Baba Amra. I had better visions of an ending, something a bit more glamorous. Not in my boxer shorts and no shoes.
I think the boxer shorts were probably a crucial factor.
They were awful by then, and they'd been on the internet all over it. So
everybody knows those boxer shorts.
They're on eBay now.
Tell me that I'm jumping out of sequence here because, as I said, I left my notebook behind. Because I just want to come up to something very different, but which is that we have a phrase, don't we? Lightning never strikes twice.
Yeah.
But it does, doesn't it?
Kind of, yeah.
Tell us.
Exeter.
Exeter. This
man
man comes from Devon, right? This man has survived Baba Amr. However, he then goes to a concert in Exeter.
And I'm walking home with my son Max here, nice and gently. That was a lovely night. La-di-da, Exeter, with hardly the heart of darkness.
This is about 8 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it's about 8 weeks ago, something like that. And so we're walking down the high street, and this guy starts badgering me, going, "Get some skins, mate." And I'm like, "I haven't got any." And he keeps going, "Get some skins." And yeah, he's like, if Max hadn't been with me, I'd have got rid of him long before.
What, with your peg leg?
I'd have just cracked him one. Honestly, it was so irritating. That's all I wanted to do. But I couldn't. I was being good dad. And so I was tolerating this guy. And then eventually he went over to Max and he's going, "Give some skins." And I'm like, "Just leave it out, mate." We got about 10 yards up the road and like crunch. I don't know if it was a brick or a piece of wood, but just from behind he just dropped me. And I felt the side of my head cave in. So I ended up with like 7 fractures. And, you know, quite a big headache and a black eye. But I didn't want to say anything too bad because Max was there, so I was going, "Oh, it's all right, mate. You know, shit happens. Let's get you into a taxi." So we got you a taxi, didn't we? And I'm going, "Yep, okay, mate, I'll see you later." And I was like, got the nearest alleyway and was like, "Oh!" And then went back to the club where Joss's mum's club, and they took one look at me. And I mean, I was talking and I could feel all these bones kind of where they shouldn't be grating against each other. And I was like, "Oh, God." And even then I was kind of laughing. It was like, this is so ridiculous that I'm in Exeter. Someone just hit me with a brick. You know, the Syrians had thrown about every kind of munition at me for 5 days they could, trying to kill me. And some dickhead with a brick succeeds. So they took me into hospital. Now I've got like titanium plates holding all this side of my face together. And I think the kids call me Tithead now. I hope that refers to titanium head.
Yeah, there was a moment when you sent me a message saying, "I might lose my eye." Okay. What?
No. I could not honestly have worn a patch, could I? Can you imagine it? Everyone like, "Paul, you've got to let it go, mate. It's been done."
What? So what about airport security? Can you get through? Are you just going to go bing, bing,
I
bing,
can't
bing,
wait. I'm just going to be standing there naked.
Again, one more funny bit before we come back to the serious bits, which is that I think this is the most surreal passage in the book, which is that you're almost out, and you're in. I don't know quite sure where you are. Anyway, but there you are, and you're almost out, and then the most bizarre thing happens. This is the only bit where I'm giving away something, I think. I'd been taken out of. I'd got out of Baba Amra, and I was on my way from Homs to where we sneaked across the border. So I was being moved by trucks and by motorbikes, any which way they could.
And I'd been taken into a house full of FSA soldiers. And I was sat there. As I sat on the cushions to rest, a tall character entered the room from the adjoining kitchen. He carried a short stock Kalashnikov and wore a combat jacket, white baggy trousers, a keffiyeh around his neck and a long greying beard. He looked directly at me, caught my gaze, smiled, and then ran his fingers across his throat. He smiled again and left. Fuck me, I thought, it's Osama bin Laden. 10 minutes passed before Osama entered the room again, performing the same throat-cutting routine, and then left. I turned to my English-speaking friend and said, "Who the hell is that?" My friend looked worried. He was the Sheikh's bodyguard in Tora Bora for 7 years. "You mean Sheikh Osama?" I asked. My friend nodded and changed the subject. Half an hour later, bin Laden's bodyguard passed through the room and repeated the finger across the neck routine. I asked my friend to ask him if I was supposed to be scared of him. My translator somewhat nervously did as I asked. Bin Laden's bodyguard stopped pacing the room and stared straight through me. Oh shit, I thought, wrong question. He walked over to me, stooped down to my seated position and looked me squarely in the eyes. "I love you," he said, planting a big kiss on my lips before bursting into laughter. He then said something to the translator in Arabic. He wants to know if you can get a visa for England. He's wanted by Interpol and has trouble travelling nowadays, my English-speaking friend told me. "Tell him I'll work on it," I said, hoping I wouldn't have to exchange email addresses with the guy. The Sheikh's bodyguard laughed and walked off.
Syria. Gets worse and worse, doesn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't stop.
Qusair fell to the Syrian government day before yesterday. Qusair means quite a lot to you, doesn't it?
It does. It was one of the routes. I stayed there a few times, going in and out. Miles, where's Miles?
Miles is there.
We scuttled around that place for a few days.
Yeah.
Town, normal town, lovely town, full of civilians, women, children. Is now just gone through the same as Baba Amra took. It took an almighty siege of the city, where it just almost a repeat. On this time though, Hezbollah have now moved in from the south and taken the city. So we have, it's a step up really. We got Assad's people and Hezbollah doing the same.
And the
tricks.
people who saved you, many of them were in Qusair.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you know anything about, because a lot of very brave Syrians helped get you out. Do you know what's happened to them?
I keep in touch with some, but they're getting fewer and fewer. Every time we make contact on Skype, I'm told of we've lost someone else from that original group of people who helped us. Dr. Hakim his tent was 2-3 kilometers from the centre, and that was the medical centre for the evacuation route from Homs. They'd come out towards Al-Qasir and then out. I've had no contact with them guys now for about 6 weeks. So it's, one can only fear the worst in that situation.
One of the things, when you first came out, and you did a lot of media and you talked to people because you wanted to talk about what had happened, and some people said that you had become like a cheerleader for the Free Syrian Army, for the opposition, that you were no longer a neutral or impartial journalist. What do you say to those people?
Bollocks, really. I don't give a shit what they say. I came out, I told what happened, told it like it happened. I couldn't tell the other side because I wasn't in Damascus. If it had been in the Balkans, I could have grabbed a bottle of Slivovitz, 200 fags, and taught my way through a Serbian checkpoint and reported from the other side. You can't do that nowadays because, as you know, we're generally targets. It'd be kind of odd to walk out of Baba Amra with a bottle of water and a couple of fags going, "Can I chat to you guys?" You can't do it anymore. It's difficult. So anyone who says I was a cheerleader for the FSA has got to suck it up, really. They saved my life. I actually saw, because of them guys, what was happening there. They didn't take us and go, "Look at this." We used our eyes. We saw what was happening. We witnessed it, which was the whole point of going. So, yeah, maybe I owe them people a lot. I owe them my life. They got me out. And if it means saying, actually, they are being blowing women, men, children to pieces, shooting them high velocity explosive tip sniper bullets, which is what we saw, then that's what's happening. I can't turn around and say that there was no, we weren't used as propaganda tools. We witnessed this, we saw it, that's why we went, that's why Marie died, that's why Remy died. So I'm not going to come out and shut up just because
Why is it important? Why is it important what you did?
Well, because all them people have died, all them innocent people have died. A lot of them activists and the people with video cameras who actually showed the world what was really happening. The Syrian activists who stood on rooftops and were blown to pieces. Then there's the Western journalists and everyone who's died out there and suffered and been maimed and wounded. There's no reason the world shouldn't know this. That's what we do. That's the point of doing that. And if we can't go out there, come back and tell it like it is, then everything's pointless that we do. But, it must be done, and we do it. And the detractors, well, tough on them.
Don McCullen said, that he's actually taken more pictures of landscapes now than he has of war.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of how he deals with his life. What do you feel about that? What do you feel about taking pictures of something else other than war?
To be honest, I've got all my kit back now. I think I've taken probably 20 photographs. I tried doing the landscapes.
Doesn't work for you?
Sun, trees, I mean, it just didn't, I've got it there. But, I don't go out looking for abstract art or anything like that. I've yet to find that. I mean, I'd like to do my job again, to be perfectly honest. And then maybe move on to landscapes when the other leg gets it or something. No, that's been stupid. No, I don't know. I just yet to find anything that I want to photograph. Really.
So that's still the thing that drives you?
Yeah, I mean, it always has. When I was brought out and laid in hospital there, I thought I'm 48, try and think up a new career move at this point. And it was just a goal. It was like, I will get back. I will go and do that again. I will be fit enough. You can't lay there and go, right, I'll get into origami or something. It just wasn't going to happen.
Paul Conroy, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Right, we've got, how long are we allowed to go for? Till past? Yeah, so we've got about 40 minutes for questions. Anyone who's ever been at an event which I've chaired before knows that I have a basic rule, which is no ranting. The only person who's allowed to rant is Paul, and possibly me if I get really irritated. But everybody else, please ask your questions. Right, anybody got any questions? Michael Binion here in the middle. Yeah.
When you were in Syria, did you meet any of the people that we subsequently heard about who are the so-called jihadists and the ones who are allied to Al-Qaeda? And have you heard in your contacts with people since that these people have begun to infiltrate the opposition and are using tactics almost as brutal as the government?
Okay, firstly, when I was actually in Bab al-Amra, there was one guy showed up as a jihadist. The Free Syrian Army immediately kidnapped him, put a bag on his head, and took him to Tripoli in Lebanon because they didn't want at that point their revolution to be sullied. They saw it as a pure revolution. They started off demanding more democracy. Assad regime opened fire and took the Gaddafi route, so to speak. So no, in Bab al-Amra when I was there, the one jihadist was kidnapped and taken to Lebanon. There was the Sheikh's bodyguard.
Yeah, I was going to say there was the Sheikh's bodyguard.
Yeah, who was there, but he seemed to be the only guy, and I'm not sure, just who and what he was, but that's what they told me, and that's what happened. They all did seem a bit scared of him, the local Syrians. But at that point, I would say no, they hadn't infiltrated. Now, obviously, a colleague of mine just back out of Syria said, if you want something done nowadays, if you want to move around Syria, then you go and meet up with Jabhat al-Nusra, and they'll give you a piece of paper, and you can wander around Syria without...
And they're the jihadists.
They are the jihadists who've moved in. So they are definitely a presence now, without doubt. But they are actually the only people who've done anything to stop the people of Syria from just being slaughtered.
Because they're basically the better fighters.
Yeah, they've come in, they're well trained, they're well armed, they know what they're doing, they've fought before. The Free Syrian Army are made up of like lawyers, dentists, bicycle mechanics. These guys, you know, defectors, but the jihadists are a powerful fighting force. And if you look at the situation for years now, the Syrians have sat there and nobody has lifted a finger. And I actually can't blame them for welcoming somebody who's actually going to stop the advance of Assad's forces. I wouldn't give a toss if it was Osama bin Laden's love child who was fighting to save me. I'd just be glad that somebody was doing something to stop my family being executed. And maybe they are using tactics as bad as the regime, car bombings, etc. But hey, it's war. And if we wanted to change that in any way, we'd have done it a couple of years ago. We can't sit here and moan that they've chosen to actually defend themselves and save their lives in any way possible.
Okay, more questions? Lady here, can you...
What do you see the kind of role with Lebanon? Do you see it spilling over into Lebanon? And I know there's obviously a lot of media coverage about Hezbollah's involvement as well, and I just wanted to hear
Well,
it
I
from
can
you.
say that a year and a half ago, Hezbollah were coming in from Lebanon and attacking Free Syrian Army positions, because at night, when me and Miles were there, the guys had to go out and patrol and fight off Hezbollah infiltrators, even at that point. So that Lebanon's always been very, you know, I mean, up until a few years ago, it's essentially an annex of Syria. So the Hezbollah have always been an issue, because when we were crossing illegally, and I'm sure the people who've done that crossing know that you have two steps to getting into Syria illegally. One's getting past the Hezbollah chaps up the Bekaa Valley, and the other is the Syrian army. So yes, they are. And now Nasrallah has come out and said they are openly there. I think that's a bit of a game changer, really.
Yeah.
And the FSA are now saying that in order to counter that, they will start attacking their positions in Lebanon. So it's opened up a new front, a new dynamic, I think, to the war.
Another question? At the back, gentleman at the back. Hang on, the microphone is coming to you.
You sound like a natural raconteur telling these stories. I'd be interested to know how you felt about, how did you approach writing the book about it? I mean, it must have been such a huge story. Where did you start?
At first it was quite daunting, because as I said, I started the book with a Word document, and I called it The Book. And I just kind of looked at this kind of shit, that's a lot of empty white paper. But then actually when I seriously thought about it, it was just the story. It took it back to basics. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was quite easy in the sense that the narrative was there for me. You know, what happened, and all I had to do was to join up the dots in a way to give it enough pace so it didn't slump in my thoughts, and really just tell the story. I think, you know, because I'm a photographer or I shoot video, I think storytellers are storytellers, and it's not that hard to make the leap from one method to the other: photographs, video, words.
You go quite backwards and forwards quite a lot, because you go back to Misrata and so on. Was that actually going on in your mind at the time? I mean, were you and Marie talking about Misrata and thinking about it as you were in Syria? Yeah,
there were inevitably comparisons that we made. You know, Misrata had been, you know, for anyone who was there at the time, it was kind of quite hellish. Gaddafi's
absolutely
was surrounded, and they just were using long-range Grad missiles.
And we lost colleagues there.
Absolutely.
Of course, we lost Chris Hodros and Tim Hetherington.
So they're inevitably, you know, which, you know, in fact, when I was blown up, you know, I immediately thought of Tim and the wounds.
Yeah.
Tim was dead because nobody got a tourniquet on in time.
Yeah.
So there were comparisons when we would sit down and go, shit, you remember Misrata? And we're sitting eating our cheese triangles and a tin of tuna. And you were almost back there, and you can't help but make comparisons between the two. And that's when we arrived in Bab Amra, the immediate comparison was to Misrata. And we looked and we went, well, this this is, no offence to any Libyans who suffered there,
Yeah.
this is much, much
Yeah.
worse, because of the Bab al-Amra itself is quite a small neighbourhood, whereas Misrata was a city and that was surrounded. Bab al-Amra being a small neighbourhood, there was nowhere to run and hide. There was, there was the basement, there were those basements. Even that wasn't bomb-proof. It was just one of the only cellars in Bab al-Amra. So that's why in the book I do kind of flip back, and just to give more of a portrait of Marie as a person, as well as, this kind of hard-assed war correspondent.
Well, I do remember that when I spoke to Marie when you were there just a few hours before she was killed, she said, Lindsey, this is the worst thing we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And she was completely clear about that. And you felt that too.
Absolutely. I mean, we were both looking at each other going,
yeah.
Yeah.
More questions? Nobody has any questions? Yes, gentleman at the front. No, it's all right. We'd like the microphone because it's on the record and people can hear you better. Yes.
I was kind of wondering how you felt about a reportage being a witness in a great powers arena like that, with the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans all debating what they're going to do about it. I mean, John Lee Anderson's piece in the New Yorker, in which he went really, really close to the jihadist leaders in Aleppo or something, I can't remember exactly where it was, certainly would have influenced American policy. How much were you aware that you were witnesses and that nobody had proper intelligence, and that what you were saying and doing might influence whether the FSA would be backed or not be backed, armed, where the CIA was in all of this? I mean, how did you see your role?
To be honest, we went in initially as we are reporters. We went in to witness we'd all seen the YouTube and the websites. Not media can get out there. Now I tell you, I could sit here with a laptop and in 10 minutes pull enough footage down, put it together and tell you any story I wanted from that footage. And that's the problem. There's so much out there that you can sit there and, I could, make out that Assad had just run off with Paris Hilton if I wanted. Because
he has actually.
Has he? Shit. I knew he was up to something. But that's the thing, it was to bear witness. That was what Marie was about. It was to bear witness, to go in and bear witness. And now, what we saw was horrifying, and what we saw did make you think, good God, the world is sitting by and watching this happen. And that's not political, and that's not influencing anybody. That is reporting what you see. Now, then you get that news out, then it's up to someone else then. It's not up to us to influence. We report what we see, get that news out, get them pictures out, and then let people decide. Then let the politicians in Russia and Iran and China, if they want to sit and watch people slaughtered, give them the ammunition and the means of doing it. I can't change that, but what I can do is get in there and show you exactly what's happening on the ground, what a pile of dead babies and women and children look like, and then let the world decide if they're going to sit and scratch their ass and do nothing. I can't do anything about that. I wish I could.
Did politicians come and see you when you came back?
They phoned me up. I was in hospital and...
Who phoned you?
Dave.
I know that. And what did Dave say? Or is it like the Queen, you're not allowed to tell us?
No, I'll tell you. Everyone was there when I was giggling like mad. I was like, all right, Dave. And he's gone, it was just kind of like, what's going on out there? He didn't say what the fuck's going on out there, but that's what he meant.
So he called you because he wanted you to tell him what you had seen?
Yeah, well, he said, what have you seen? Essentially, who are the FSA? What have they got? You were there, you saw them, you know them. And we talked for a while. I told him, what my assessment, there is slaughter going on. It is a massacre. And we discussed the best way to handle it. And I said, get to Putin. Because Putin had just been re-elected.
Yes.
Oxymoron, Putin election.
Yeah. We know what you mean.
Yeah,
he had just returned to power.
Returned to power. That's it. And he was going to meet him, I think, the next day. And I'm saying, look, you've got to drive it home to the Russians. I think this was a few days in, actually, after I got back. I said, if you want to stop what's happening in Syria, you've got to get to the Russians. Because, it was Russian metal that was sticking out of me. It was Russian steel that...
So you felt... I mean, I know you're not a politician or, an advocate of anything. You're a photographer. But at that point, it's interesting that your thought was diplomatic rather than send in arms and arm the FSA. That wasn't what you said to him.
No. And under no circumstances I said. I was in the British Army in the artillery. And you know, we could not, as the army stands when I was in, have kept that barrage of rockets and artillery going.
Yeah.
You know, we'd have run out of ammunition after 2 days, and there'd be this like kind of big hoo-ha while they got it down there. The Syrians didn't have that problem. They were just sitting, throwing it in, and it was, you know, not.
And that's because they get so much from the Russians.
Because they had such a stockpile and they had such a resupply route. And you know, if you want to stop killing people, if you want the killing to stop, the only way, Assad is not going to sit back and, you know, you've got the United Nations and they're going, you know, we condemn this and we want this to stop. I may as well get Otto to say that. You know, he's not listening. He's carrying on. The best way to do it is to cut off the supply of ammunition that is doing it, which is Russia and Iranian technology such as drones, which are flying about.
Iranian drones.
Yep.
So, but that's interesting because it's quite interesting because when you're on the front line, it's often quite hard to think of the diplomacy. You often just think, you know, more emotionally. But I'm interested that what you saw was you have to talk to the Russians. That was what came up.
That was it, because already at that point in Homs, people were going around calling Putin the butcher of Homs. That was already coming through from because the Syrians used to, the Homsis, the people of Homs, used to stop me and say, you know, for years, many years, we were told that Russia was our friend and that you were the evil West. And that's what they'd grown up with. Now, all of a sudden, they know, because a lot of them were defectors, that the weapons and the ammunition being thrown at them was by the Russians, and that Russia was doing nothing to cut off that and doing nothing diplomatically, which left them in a really strange position where you got Western reporters trying to get their story out, and their friends for the last X number of years are the ones who are actually dropping the explosive steel.
So how did they? I'm interested in that. How did they deal with that? Did they find that very hard to understand?
They found it very confusing. Because it had been a complete belly flop. You know.
Yeah.
You know, Russia, friends, arms, munitions, all that they were there. They've got a Russian port in Syria, and all of a sudden they find themselves under attack from the very people, you know, assisted by the very people who they thought were their friends, and that messed with their heads. They couldn't understand that. But I think that was 1.5 years ago. But in that 1.5 years, when we would say, look, they'd say, is help coming in? And say, we can get pictures out, we can get stories out, show the world what's happening. It's up to the world what happens then.
Yeah.
You know, and the world sat there and effectively, you know, sent Kofi Annan in for tea and biscuits for a while, and he got out. And, you know, the world actually did very little to stop what was happening diplomatically or in any sense, really. And in that 1.5 years, we've lost the goodwill. And in that vacuum that occurred, the jihadists and al-Nusra moved in and established an effective fighting force. And what we're going to be left with is a semi-failed state in the middle of one of the most, you know, dangerous places on earth, really, but it's surrounded. We are going to be left with
sort of fragmented state between Shia and Sunni and Iran and Saudi Arabia. More questions? Anybody else? Michael, you've already had a question, but we'll come to you, the gentleman there.
It's a photographer question. I'm wondering whether you are haunted by the stuff you had to leave behind in terms of the pictures you'd shot. Did you lose a lot of material?
Yeah.
You know, your frustration about losing the cameras. Did Remy have stuff that people got out? And actually, I'd be quite interested to hear a little bit about Edith.
Yeah. I mean, so let's talk about, for those of you who don't know, Remy Oshlik was also killed. He was a young French photographer, Edith Bouvier, also a French journalist who was injured like Paul in the attack that killed Marie and Remy. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I had obviously I had a laptop, and I'd been downloading images onto that laptop, and I'd uploaded some for 1 week's story, and I had a camera full of images and a laptop full of images. That was the laptop went in the explosion. That was kind of shredded. My camera actually got retrieved and given back to me. So at one point I had my camera in my hands, and I was like, woohoo! I got some, images. But when we left through the tunnel, I got out on the motorbike first and popped out the other end, and the guy carrying my bag with the camera in and the the disc, the chips. The army then attacked the tunnel, and a lot of people were killed. They were throwing grenades down and opened fire. So the bag with the camera in actually got left in the tunnel, and is probably now in the possession of some Assad kind of intelligence people or whatever. But they got me photographs essentially, which really did cheese me off. Yeah.
Tell us a bit about Remy and Edith and William and the other people, because it wasn't just you and Marie there.
No. Well, I mean, we'd got to a point where Marie and I had sat and discussed, we are gonna leave Baba Amra. You know, this is getting, if we don't get out now, you know, we talked with Sean, the foreign editor at the Sunday Times, and we'd made a deal that we'd leave the next day. And so it was about midnight, I think it was, and we were all sitting there huddled up with our blankets. We'd become blanket people then. We were one of them. We were all sitting there, and Marie's gone, but we're both a bit grumbly about having to leave. But I'm thinking, it's not such a bad idea, because if that tunnel goes, that's the way out cut. When there was a kind of noise at the door, and in walked Remy, Edith, William, and Javier.
Javier from El Mundo, Spanish journalist.
And they walked in, and I knew as soon as I saw them, I went, bollocks. Because Marie just kind of caught my eye across the room and went, ah. And I went across and sat next to her, and she said, you still want to go now that the Euro trash are here? And it was like, I just lost the battle to get. And so, I mean, Remy, it was fantastic to see Remy, who had been in quite a few battles within Libya, and he was a good friend. Javier I knew, Edith had not met. But Remy came and sat with me, and he said, how is it? And I said, this was midnight, so it had calmed to a certain degree, but they'd just come through the tunnel, so they were high on adrenaline. And he was just chatting, and I said, look, mate, you can hardly leave the building at the moment. The shelling's that intense. So they sat and they started getting a quick mail out and letting people know they were in and safe. I think they were there 7 hours before Remy was killed along with Marie. Never really.
And Remy was only 27.
Yeah. He's a young lad just starting out, and he was a good photographer.
Yeah,
he was
brave.
He was very good photographer. And I just remember in the last moments I saw him. You know, he was there with his flak jacket. He'd managed somehow to get his flak jacket on his helmet and was doing the right thing. But you know, at the end of the day, it boils down to sheer bad luck sometimes.
And Edith, what happened to Edith?
Edith, the door, when the blast happened, when the last blast that did the damage to everybody, the door that had separated the corridor where you put your shoes on to the main room, that actually just spun around the room like a frisbee. And it hit our translator, snapped his arm, and it hit Edith on the...
So that was Whale, your translator?
Whale, our translator. He got his arm snapped, and it fractured Edith. It snapped Edith's femur completely. And that was the door that it came through.
So she was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And how is she now?
She's back out working. Last I heard, she was down to Congo.
Oh, God. So she's, because her journey out was as traumatic as yours.
I think her journey out was worse, because I knew that, you know, with a bit of help I could get through that tunnel.
Yeah.
One way or another. She was laying on a bed with
she was like on a stretcher. She had to have her leg up.
And she's got to have her leg out, and they've tied a rope around with 5 litres of plasma. Yeah. To make it kind of pull her leg, so the two bones weren't rubbing together, because not only did it hurt a lot, it was actually very dangerous. Because when the bones rub together, they kind of produce stuff that can clot in your heart. Right. So it was really important that, you know, she got stuck halfway down the tunnel when they attacked.
Oh, God.
On a stretcher. And initially, the guys all just legged it. And so she was left, they put a Kalashnikov on her leg and said, we'll be back in a bit. And so she was with William, the young French journalist, William. And she was just laying there on a stretcher with a Kalashnikov, while everyone else had run down the tunnel the other way. They did come back, but I think they were just going to check out what was happening. So she's pretty tough. She's absolutely, I'd go out with her on a job anytime. In fact, we've got a plan.
Oh, God.
Secret.
Do we need to hear it?
Can't tell you at the moment.
No, please.
Top secret.
Doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Dear, oh dear. Okay, more questions. Yes, gentleman in the front here.
You said it's quite hard to actually leave the building where you were sort of staking out.
Yeah.
How possible was it actually to get around and see what was going on, and did you actually get quite a lot of time sort of in the field?
I mean, in Bab el-Amra, we could go out. It's just, you know, you have to be nimble on your feet. And then the vehicles started decreasing because they were obviously getting hit. But you could go out, and we did, you know, I mean, we did. We got to the field clinic when it was under attack, and yeah, it was quite horrendous because we stood outside initially, and then they'd attack. You know, you got to bear in mind that one of the most dangerous occupations in Syria is to have anything to do with hospitals, medicine, doctors. They were targets. They were targeted more than guys with weapons because they knew if they could kill the doctors and the people who were treating the injured, then, you know, they would be in a very bad situation. So it's kind of ironic that you go from the media centre when you're injured to the field hospital, which is actually the main target. You know, that is under constant bombardment. So it was possible to go out. You would kind of be foolish to go out on your own and roam because they knew where the snipers were and which roads you ran across and which roads you could drive across. And so, no, you needed assistance. You couldn't just... You'd get, I don't know, 20, 30 yards in Bab el-Amra without a guide to show you which way to go or which buildings to look for. It was impossible to just... It wasn't Libya where you could kind of break off and,
just
you know,
wander about.
Go around and have a little look down this road and that road. You wouldn't be able to do that. That was a no-go. So you needed a degree of cooperation. But, you know, there were guys in the media centre there, not Free Syrian Army, you know, guys who were taking pictures and that, who would run with you across the streets and across the junctions and get you to the place. The guy who took us wasn't Army, Free Syrian Army. He was, you know, he was a media guy, and he said, just follow me. And
do you know what's happened to him?
No sign of him at the moment, but knowing him, he's okay and laying low.
And what about Wales? Because you talk in the book about your translated Wales, and you've just said that his arm was broken. Do you know what's happened to him?
I got an email from Wales 3 days ago with a great big smiley face saying, how are you? So thankfully...
And is he still in Syria?
He's in Lebanon at the moment.
Okay,
and
good.
He's, you know, he was badly wounded, and it was really great to see the pictures of him, you know, with his family and, you know, looking happy and well.
Right, so that's good. Yes, gentleman there, and then gentleman. Do you want to pass to the guy behind you, and then to you? Yes.
Do you have any reflections on the Western attention to the Western journalist? I mean, the information coming from the Syrian journalists, or the attention given to the Western journalists getting killed, but there was so many people getting killed by protecting you. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think it's bullshit. I hate being the story. I would much rather the story was them, but I can't help it. If people are going to say to me what happened, I'll tell them. You know, I can tell them to go and speak to the Syrian journalists, which I've done since the moment I got out, and I've actively tried to get people to listen to them. So I don't have any qualms with it. I'm not going to sit there and shut up because it looks bad. I don't give a shite about that politics. You know, I saw what I saw. I will talk about what I saw. I don't talk about what other people have seen because I can't. That's nonsense. I can only say what I saw and what I felt and what happened when I was there. If people are going to listen to me because I got a hole in my leg, great. I'll have another hole in my leg and then maybe they'll listen more. I don't care about that rubbish. I saw what I saw, I reported it. Other people go out, see what they say, they can report it. And if people want to point cameras at me and listen to me ramble on because I got a hole in my leg, bring it on. I'm really not bothered by that political crap. Sorry, I wasn't being too aggressive.
No, that's fine, darling. It was absolutely lovely. And gentleman in the front.
On the basis that there probably won't be any military intervention from us or from anyone else, can you see a solution that doesn't involve Assad?
That's a
serious political question.
Right, let's get serious political head on. I see Assad, even if he went now, if Assad packed his little overnight bag, got his passport, got a visa to Russia, and went to live in some nice Dhaka.
With Paris Hilton.
With Paris Hilton, yeah. You know, good on him, off he goes. But in Syria, there are too many, you know, Assad is in many ways a figurehead of the regime. Behind him, there's a lot of family. There's a lot of people from his father's day. There's a lot of generals. There's the heads of the security services. The people of Syria know who them people are. Now, Assad may well get out. He may well take the easy option and not do a Gaddafi. You know, but at the end of the day, this won't stop till they know who they're looking for now. They will be hunted down. The uncles, the generals, the security chiefs. So really, Assad, it's a case of when, not if he goes. I really think he will go. The genie is out the bottle, trust me.
But the when could be a long
absolutely long and bloody.
I mean, I was reading
road.
something, I don't know if anybody read the brilliant piece by Patrick Coburn in the London Review of Books, pointing out that the war in Lebanon lasted 15 years.
Exactly. It could go on, and you know, the figurehead leaving doesn't change things. You know, Assad could go tomorrow and that battle would keep raging because he's successfully turned it into, you know, Sunni, Shia, Alawite,
and
you know, and he's done
whole
that
region's now involved.
Really well, and you know, he's created a situation that can't just be negotiated out of. I see what's about to happen in Geneva, and the US and the Russians sitting together as, you know, I think I said in telly, I'll eat me boots.
Yeah, but you were the one who said that talking to the Russians was the most important thing.
Yeah, but it doesn't work though, does it? They've done it for
That's
a year
the
and a
problem.
half. It actually doesn't work. You know, when Putin came back in, my point to Cameron was, Putin is now known as the butcher of Homs. I said, if you get that message to Putin that he's losing Syria, he's losing the people of Syria, then my message to Cameron was, tell him that. I was there, I saw it. You know, tell he's making a great big cock up, which he has. And he might have told him, but Putin being Putin didn't listen. He should have listened to me.
That's what I've always said to Vladimir. Every time I see him, why don't you listen to Paul?
Yeah. Just thick.
More questions. There's a lady over there. I am going to come back to you, Michael, but you've already had one. So. There's one behind you. Yes.
Hi. I'm just wondering about this situation for children in Syria. I mean, obviously, it's absolutely horrific, but we've heard stories about children being detained and being tortured, and I'm just wondering if you feel like children are being specifically targeted. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of attacks on schools, but I feel it's you know, to a new level, so I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Did you see anything specifically about children when you were there?
I saw children with bullets through the head and the heart. And I think that just says everything. Anyone who can line up a high-velocity rifle on a 2-year-old and take a shot at them, yeah, I think children were targeted. If you look back to the very beginning,
in Daraa,
you know, it started with, you know, a gang of kids and graffiti and taken off. So, you know, from the very, very moment, from the word go, children have been used as in this war, in this conflict. And I don't see any reason why that's going to change. If not, it's only going to, you know, people have had 3 years of this now. Kids have grown up with it. Kids who were 1, who are now 4, have known nothing but shelling and death and gore and blood. So it's inevitable that you know, people are growing up now. It's not this isn't Libya where it came and went in a nice media-friendly time scale. This has been going on for years, and this will go on for years. So a whole generation of kids are going to be used one way or another, used or completely mentally traumatized by what's happening in Syria now. That's makes it even more sickening when you think of the lack of any kind of serious attempt at stopping this. You know, is the fact that there are kids there and they will grow up and see this as that's their life at the moment.
Yeah. Michael, you had another question?
Well, that follows on really exactly from what you just said, and that is, you've been to Syria before in times of peace, and so have I, and the thing that has often struck people in Syria in the old days was what lovely people, what nice, warm, hospitable, charming, friendly people. What do you think what is it about Syria in particular that has led to the degree of brutality and almost sadism that seems to have entered into this war? Is there something about Syria or about the people there in particular that has led to this level of nasty violence and sadism.
Yeah, well, I understand completely. I mean, Syria, when I visited in times of peace, is beautiful. The most warm, welcoming. You know, they're educated, sophisticated. You know, there's a country there that was. I saw none of the, the Sunni, Shia, Alawite, Christian factions. I saw it as a pretty united country. And maybe it's because it was so, calm in many ways between the ethnic groups, that when it has been fired up, it's cracked in a very big way. It's fractured in a huge way, and not in a small. It's just gone bang. With what Assad has done to 80% of the population is Sunni. They took it, 50 years ago, there was a power shift. And I think by the very fact that it was so stable, that when it's gone bang, unfortunately it's gone fractured and gone bang in a very big way, because it's been, he's pushed for that, he's deliberately pushed the right buttons to make them sectarian divides open up. It's not an accident that it's gone from a democracy, call for democracy, to a religious, now jihadi, a religious divide. Them buttons are being pushed to make exactly that happen, and this is the level of sadism that we're seeing now is being encouraged and actively, pursued to make them cracks. Whether it's to make it more difficult for anyone to intervene, because it is very difficult now to do anything about the situation, and if that's the way he's done it very well, and he's succeeded in fracturing a relatively stable, not very democratic country, but they certainly weren't doing what they were doing now 3-4 years ago.
We're having to wrap up in a minute, but is there any more questions before we wrap up? No?
Come on.
Go on then. Wait for the microphone, and then we'll come to you, sir.
There are lots of freelancers who are complaining that it's very difficult to get foreign desks to listen to them, to take their stories and send them on assignment. And do you have a sense of the contribution that freelancers are making to the reporting of Syria? I mean, leaving aside Manny, obviously.
It's been, yeah, I know he's here. I saw him earlier. No, I think the contribution of freelancers has been, without them, we'd be in a lot darker place. Yeah. No less, there'd be less, So I mean, I think they've made an incredible contribution.
Can you give some examples, some specific examples?
Yeah, well, Manny.
Where's Manny?
Stand up, Manny.
Stand up,
there he is.
Manny. For those who don't know, Manny is a fantastic freelance who filmed a story which is called Horror of Homs, which we showed on Channel 4 News, which has won endless awards, and he's been in many times, and he's a bit nuts. And he's very brave, and he's done fantastic stuff. But he is not the only one. And I think that maybe the other thing one has to talk about... Sorry, can you give the microphone to Manny? What are you saying?
I just wanted to remind Javier Manzano, who is the first freelancer for many, many years to win the Pulitzer.
Yes.
Incredible work, and many other photojournalists.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing which I think we ought to say is about the Syrians who are filming every day. They're not just freelance, they have nothing apart from their cameras and their mobile phones.
Absolutely.
And of course all that wobble vision, I mean, it all sort of begins to look the same, and it's very complicated, and some of it's, specifically, for particular militant groups and so on. But there are Syrians every day going out and filming what's happening in their country at extraordinary risk, and they are being killed, and we don't know about it. We don't know their names. We don't know their names, we don't know their families' names, and I think that that's the thing which is very important to remember.
Absolutely. I mean, when they're caught, life for them is over. I mean, we would often, there are stories abound of people who've gone out and taken pictures, are found the next day outside the house with their eyes gouged out.
Yeah.
That kind of...
And they're the ones who are really brave. Before we end, let me just... One of the things I like about the book is that it brings Marie back to life for me as her friend. And Paul, just tell us one one anecdote, one story about Marie. Just tell us something.
I'll tell you that my favourite little one is we'd done all them interviews up for CNN. In fact, I'll read it out because
Go on then. Do you know where it is? Do you know what page it is?
I brought a book here. I marked this one out just because it's funny and it does give you a real sense. I'm going to need a gig from here. It does give you a real sense of Marie. We'd been on the Skype conversation and we'd made a deal, cut a deal with the editor, Sean, to actually leave and get out. Then Remy, Edith, Javier, William came in and we were just sitting there in our blankets and they just walked in the door. She looked at me with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Hey Paul, you still want to go now the French are here?" she asked. It was the killer blow. All the effort and work that Sean and myself had put into getting Marie clear of Baba Amra had just been blown out of the water. There was little hope of persuading her to leave now the other journalists were here. Marie immediately saw them as oppositions, as intruders on her story. Personally, my heart sank. I knew he was staying. By then, Marie's mind had already switched back to the story. She would write for Sunday's edition. "Paul, we got to get the field clinic in the morning, before the French," she said. I laughed and reminded her that all the cars had been blown up. We'd have to go to the clinic on foot. That meant a lot of sniper dodging. All the major junction en route to the clinic appeared to have their own personal sniper, who never seemed to sleep. Shit, I'd forgotten about the snipers. "How about we go at 5 a.m, she said, "when it's very quiet." I shrugged wearily, pointing out that it was now past midnight and we should arrange the plan with Abu Hanin. "You want to go when?" Abu Hanin asked in shock. We explained our plan to get to the field hospital before the snipers were up and to stay as long as possible. Abu Hanin continued to look at us baffled, but having become somewhat accustomed to his guests' odd request, he finally agreed to take us to the hospital on foot at 5 in the morning. "I will be ready," he replied. "At 5 a.m. I do not sleep and will not need an alarm clock." Marie eyed him dubiously but let it pass. It was gone midnight when we said goodnight to the others in the main room. We had an early start ahead of us and we wanted to get as much sleep as possible. The new group of journalists had then been with us for less than a few hours when we said goodnights. They sat freezing, writing emails and letting people know that they had arrived safely in Baba Amra. The word "safely" in Baba Amra had an exceedingly oxymoronic ring to them. In our nests, we hunkered down for the night in the spare room. Marie sat at her phone for an early start. "Paul," she whispered, "I think the shelling's making me deaf." "What?" I replied to hear this news. "Let me look. That's not good." I pulled out my small LED torch while she sat up and let me inspect her ear. What I saw shocked me. "Wait a moment, Marie," I said, reaching for a small bag and a box of matches. "Stay very still. Do not move. I have to go into your ear." She felt silent as I probed her ear with the matchstick. I eventually hooked out what I had seen slowly and pulled it from her ear. I held it up next to her head. "Okay, you can look now," I said. She squinted in the pale light. "Jesus, what the fuck is that?" she gasped. "Marie, that is the rubber earpiece from my headphones." "It's been in there since you did the CNN broadcast." We tried to sleep but had little luck. The cause of Marie's temporary deafness was so ridiculous that one of us would erupt with laughter every 5 minutes, flinging the other into unsurpassed hysterical giggles. It took an age for sleep to come. I will never know who drifted off to sleep first on that cold black night in Baba Amra. But even now, when it's dark and sleep won't come, I can still hear our laughter, our ridiculous and raucous laughter.
Thank you, Paul Conroy. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Conroy.
Thank you. Lindsey Hilsum. Cheers, Danny.
Buy the book. That's it.